Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 34, Episode 17. Coming up on this show, we've got Attack of the Dome Monsters, The Bulletproof Beasts, and Freight Train's Big Hairy Protest. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
Is that a euphemism?
Who is Freight Train, you ask?
Sounds like a wrestler or something.
It's a great name for a big, angry Sasquatch. With an even bigger, angrier member.
What's this from?
I found this book today. It's like gold, right? This drops into my lap.
You messaged me. You were quite excited, which is unusual for you when you get these sorts of books.
I had a couple of other things lined up, but I just wasn't feeling it.
I get it.
And I just sat down and opened this because I'd bought it about a week ago, just thinking it'll come in handy one day. Just absolute gold from start to finish. It's by Barbara Shoup. It's The Unseen Audience. And in a little subheader, Walking with Sasquatch. Turns out Sasquatch... Well, the Sasquatch she encounters is this giant freak she calls Freight Train. There's this story, I'll tell you this later in the Plus extension, where she decides to go out because there's been a bunch of Bigfoot activity and it's a big build-up to this moment. She learns that the wood knocking thing can get their attention.
Yeah, right. Plenty of Sasquatch researchers have tried that.
Yeah, and so
setting off fireworks.
She lives in this cabin in the middle of the woods in Washington near Mount Rainier, and she decides to go out and try this wood knocking thing. She does it in the middle of the night. And
why? Why would you think that's a good idea?
Because she'd seen it on TV or something. So she goes out, she does the wood knocking. And the reason she calls this Sasquatch Freight Train is because it really sounded like a freight train coming through the forest. Like as soon as she whacked her stick on that tree, it was this trees, this howling trees getting thrown out, uprooted, like things getting bowled over. She said the ground was vibrating and she's whacking this tree and there's a river between her and the opposite side of the river. She hears Freight Train coming.
And what, does it stop at the river or something?
Well, she can't see him, right? She can't see him in this experience because it's too dark, it's too black. But ultimately she learns that on the other side of the river, Freight Train had gotten his big, hairy Sasquatch dick out and was waving it at her from the other side of the river, giving her the finger. And all the evidence of this was revealed the next day.
What is the evidence?
Because Freight Train had unleashed a torrent of piss. He was on the other side of the river, giving her the finger, dick out, just pissing this huge, she said it was like a swimming pool. Like she's seen racehorses piss,
and that's
all sorts
terrifying
of
enough.
Giant animals just unleash a torrent. She says this was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was just an unimaginable amount of yellow piss, like it was in the snow, so she could tell the next day it had all frozen. And so she calls him Freight Train. And a lot of the book is essentially tracking down Freight Train.
Why? Why would this, okay, it'll all become very clear very soon because coincidentally, without knowing what you were going to be talking about on the show at all, I came across this little story about someone who had a rather dangerous encounter with a Bigfoot. So for this show, I want to go through a collection of reports of people that have had terrifying encounters with cryptozoological creatures.
Oh, really?
Right, and the biggest warning is, don't mess with this stuff.
Yeah, it was funny because we were messaging each other at lunchtime and I said, man, I just got this crazy Bigfoot story. He just gets his big...
As soon as he said he gets a big dick out, I'm like, okay,
he gets his dick out. He's waving around. It's a great story. And to be fair, I'm being very vulgar at the start of the show.
That's why I put it in plus.
Fantastically written. She's a brilliant, brilliant writer.
Really?
It's absolutely fantastic.
That's
because
refreshing.
usually these books are garbage, but this is really well done. And she takes you through her experiences because she was working for a logging company for years.
Yes,
so she was always in the woods.
Yeah.
And
she's in their domain.
She goes from the first point where she saw a footprint in the woods. And that was the first thing. And she takes you through where ultimately, because when I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, when are we going to have spaceships and orbs and voices in her head, which eventually come? But you're with her the whole way. It was really fantastic. And that first footprint she finds.
Is it a singular print?
It's a singular print.
There's a reason behind that. which I'll get
Really?
into. Yeah, there's a reason behind that.
She does this mini kind of CSI forensics work on how the print got there.
Because
Because
she pour plaster in it or something?
well, she's walking down this walking track and she sees 2 fir trees that are missing their tops. They're just like 13-foot fir trees and the tops are gone, so they're only 9-foot tall trunks. And she looks further down the track and the track, and there's 2 tops of fir trees like placed on either side of the track. And the friend she's with is like, "Can we just go? Why are you concerned about these treetops?" And she says, "How did they get there? This doesn't make any sense. Like, how did these perfectly young, healthy trees have their tops torn off and thrown into the road?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "I don't know. Let's just go."
Because would a bear do that?
She insists, well, you need an opposable grip to tear the top off a tree, you'd presume, and tremendous strength. And so she insists on investigating, and she goes, fair way in and starts to find what looks like impressions. And then she sees a stump with a perfect print next to it, as if something's stepped on the stump and then slipped, and their foot has gone into the dirt, and it's left a very deep impression.
So what, it's somehow like dancing through the woods upon stumps?
Well, it's a large 12-inch print, looks like her footprint, but just huge. And this is her CSI conclusion. She claims a Sasquatch was walking through the forest, tried to step on the stump and slipped, and then got so angry, he was like, "Arr!" And he tore these 2 trees off and threw them into the road and then stormed off in a huff.
Not sure I agree with that one. Because also, if it fell off, wouldn't there be like a slide kind of angle to it?
Yeah, it's all there.
Oh, it's all there, is it?
I totally agreed with her.
You're just like, okay, that's fine.
Like, it's totally forensic study of the footprint and its surroundings. It's like she was a detective.
Okay, so it's not Rex Gilroy level research, but it's up there.
Well, speaking of Rex Gilroy, I'll just give you one image preview of what's coming up. That's kind of Rex Gilroy-esque.
Well, yeah.
Just 2 eyeballs in the forest, but she's conveniently drawn their head around them.
Look at the pixelation in that. Like, it's like, okay.
Dude, it's a banger.
All right, well,
absolute banger.
I'm looking forward to getting into that because, yeah, as I was saying just a little bit earlier there, that I came across this rather unsettling report. It's rather old now, but it really reinforces the dangers of interacting with this kind of stuff. And we know the stories about people interacting with UFOs. Like, that's Nick Redfern's written books about the dangers of it. I'll link to that in the show notes. There's the stories like, the guy that was a hunter and he wandered up against what appeared to be a UFO and it blasted off. And when it blasted off, it left like a great impression, like a burn in his chest.
That's
It's
right.
like that classic image. There's the Betty and Cash Landrum incident, where essentially it seems like they were radiated, possibly by a UFO, possibly by an advanced human craft. We don't really know. But those sorts of things we know. We also know about things like ghost hunters. Like a lot of ghost hunters, they really ham it up and they get themselves a little bit silly. But there are, plenty of reports of ghost hunters, demonologists that they get attacked by poltergeists. They get scratched. They get pushed.
Things follow them home.
It affects
Strings
their neighbors.
of bad luck.
Yeah, all that kind of
Their
stuff.
house filled with vermin and strange smells and weird mold
And
starts
water.
to appear.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So there is a danger in this stuff. But what people don't really think of is the dangers of interacting with cryptozoological creatures. Of course, there's that natural idea that a Bigfoot, for the most part, people know what a Bigfoot is as well. This is the thing that stands out in many of these cases that I'm going to tell you today, because there's a bunch of people that are outdoorsmen, but are also not outdoorsmen. It's like they've just gone out for the first time for a walk through the forest and they encounter something from popular culture. They know what a Bigfoot is. They know the difference between it being a Bigfoot and a bear and a large animal. It's like, because these people witness these things close up, they know exactly what they are. So you would understand that if you come up against a 10 to 12 foot tall in some circumstances, massive creature like Freight Train, that there would be a danger associated with interacting with these things. But for other people, it seems like there's a more supernatural or an energetic danger.
Well, it's fascinating again in this book I'll be sharing in Plus how it starts off with the pure physical evidence of the footprints and the broken trees and the wood knocking and the sounds and the howls. And by the end of it, we're in full-on poltergeist, orbs floating through the forest, strange light UFO activity going on, weird mists and portals.
Perfect. Yeah, because that's what happens with this stuff. It starts off relatively it's still, a weird encounter to have, But for a small percentage of people, it really does seem to pursue them.
And what's interesting in this case is Barbara didn't own a computer. She wasn't plugged into any of this mythology.
Right. Was she a Bigfoot researcher though?
No.
No, okay.
No,
She's just working for a lumber company.
She's not interested in it at all. Had heard a few stories, but just thought it was ludicrous. But as soon as she saw that footprint, it set something off.
Yeah.
And it started a chain of events that would lead her to the high strangeness that makes these stories so bizarre.
I'm sure we'll get into it, but did her health fail at any point or diminish?
No, not at all.
So-
Her animals died though.
Well, that often happens in these cases as well. So this particular case I found from Nexus Newsfeed, but it was originally published by Lon Strickler, of course, Lon Strickler from Phantoms and Monsters.
Yeah.
I'll link to his blog as well. You can check it out. But it's this story. It's quite old now. It's actually before you and I even started working on MU together, Ben. It's back from 2009.
Back in 1936.
Yeah, 1936, I think. It was just before the Second World War
That's
that we
right,
started working together. So, yeah. Basically, there's the person that's writing this. They're I don't know their name. I don't know who it is, but essentially they're the friend of Pam Porter or Pamela Porter. So Pam Porter was a hardcore Sasquatch researcher back in the mid-2000s.
Okay.
And, she had a variety of experiences, but this particular person, I believe, wrote into Lon and said, look, I've struggled with what's happened here, but I really need to tell Pam's story because I think something may have happened. And I met her back in 2009 and instantaneously we became best friends. There was such this strong connection between us. It felt like we'd known each other forever. And we were on an expedition at the time when I met her, and it was immediately very apparent that not only was Pam a fearless researcher, she was also very determined to have a direct encounter with Sasquatch. Now, I get it. I get you want to believe. You want to see this stuff. But at what cost? What's the cost of doing this kind of thing?
Severe radiation burns, apparently.
Pretty much. So this was recounted in Pam's own words. So apparently this encounter took place in 2007 in Honobia, if that's correctly pronounced, I'm sorry, or Honobia in Oklahoma. And this friend of hers believes that this particular encounter may have led to her death. Oh. And he said there was a lot of buzz around this particular trip about, what may have happened to her. But she did share details about what the experience was, and she wrote this account out. She said, when I arrived at the expedition in Oklahoma, I learned that there was an area that there had been several encounters with a very aggressive male. I volunteered to spend the night camping in the area alone.
Classic start to a freight train encounter.
Not a good idea. So she says, 3 members took me to the spot that this male was known to frequent and helped me to get my tent set up. We were waiting for such and such, so it must be another person who's connected with them, to bring a thermal camera and some recording equipment, and I asked them to move away about 150 yards so I could sense the male was close. It was late afternoon, nearing dusk, and I became aware that the male was indeed very close. I was catching glimpses of him through the underbrush, and he began shaking trees and vocalizing. I held my ground and began talking calmly to him. It's like getting social workers, to a violent offender.
You've got to talk him down from not ripping your arms off.
Well, this is what happens to people. There are reports, and they're anecdotal, but there are reports of people that have limbs torn off, and there's terror. There's old reports. There was this old, it was a Native American report of where this grandmother claimed, she was the witness, right? Well, I'll just deviate to the story for a second. The witness was this grandmother. And so she was telling her grandson this story about what happened to her grandfather. And she claims, and there's no way to validate any of this whatsoever, so take it with a grain of salt. But she claims that her father or grandfather, was attacked by a Sasquatch. The Sasquatch ripped off his arm and beat him to death with it.
Whoa.
I was like, these things are not to be met. If that's
One
real,
way to go.
And that's true, that's a pretty, apparently this was just readily accepted amongst that community. It was yeah, that's what these things do. You don't want to mess with them. It's a really, really bad idea.
Freight train does.
Yeah.
Beats you to death with his giant
with your own
iguana.
arm. Yeah. Well, beats you to death with his giant appendage. Going back to this particular story, she said that I was beginning to calmly talk to him, but his aggression grew, but I continued to hold my ground. And before I knew it, I was being hit by something. My entire body began vibrating and I was frozen in place, unable to move. Now, she says apparently she'd keyed the radio up trying to initiate a call, and it did go through, but they couldn't hear anything she was saying. She couldn't communicate. Apparently, the radio signals were received, so they sent people running out there as quickly as they could. And she says, I don't really recall what happened. I just remember kind of coming to and seeing this male moving away as soon as the guys arrived. And it took a while for me to regain my composure as I wasn't able to speak. And, I was very unsettled, but I still wanted to spend the night.
Oh, God.
Okay. Apparently, one of the men offered to stay there with them, and the rest of the night was uneventful, and the male did not return.
This doesn't sound like a physical attack, though. Is it some kind of unseen energy that does this?
Yes, she believes it's infrasound.
Okay.
She believes she was hit with this wall of infrasound. Now, infrasound is intriguing in a paranormal sense, because there is some belief amongst certain researchers that infrasound is responsible for why people get an eerie feeling in a haunted house, because especially during thunderstorms, because the thunderstorm interacting with the materials of the house generates infrasound, and that's why people see things. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. What we do know, though, is infrasound has been used by the military and governments for crowd control, that kind of stuff. It's pretty effective from what's been told about how it can be used. Apparently, you can kind of have it set to a wide spectrum to hit a lot of people, or you can set it to one particular person, and you can cause loss of bowel control. I like that. There's the brown noise. It can cause disorientation, vomiting, potential internal organ damage, nausea, like a whole heap of things that it can be done from infrasound.
It definitely overlaps with what people who claim they've seen these things in the forest report.
Absolutely.
Very occasionally.
Many people report being hit by this kind of stuff. In fact, there was a book, which I went into a little bit today, but I won't go into it in too great a detail. It's called When Bigfoot Attacks. It's by Michael Newton. And in that particular book, it was available only in paperback, but it has now been released on Kindle. And there is a collection of reports in there of people being attacked by infrasound.
Surely we've done that.
Oh, we have. Yeah, we've done that book many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, this is a great book.
Yeah, really, really great book. We only had it in paperback, but yeah, so I'll link to it in the show notes as well. But that has a collection of those sorts of reports of people that are hit with a wall of something, and the suspicion is it's infrasound. See, this was the other thing that was theorized, is that the Dyatlov Pass incident, for example, where those hikers' bodies were found, after their tents had been shredded, their tongues had been ripped out and all that kind of stuff, a very strange circumstance.
It's funny because, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, what the theory was with that is that they were attacked by some type of supernatural entity. That's one of the theories. They were attacked by aliens, or they were attacked by an abominable snowman or something like that, which would be consistent with the reports that I'm reading today about what they do. But the other theory is that it was infrasound. Like I guess the geography of the mountain generated a large amount of infrasound, which caused them to go crazy. I don't know why you go crazy and rip your tongue out, but that's just one of the theories that's out there.
I was going to say, it's in the story I've got coming up. Barbara receives a message she claims is from one of these entities at one point, but she describes it as it's almost like a slap in the head.
Well, that would be infrasound.
Yeah, but it's in the form of a message. Like it has contextual, and it's like an image in her head. Well, it's information being conveyed, but it's the sense of urgency. She says it feels like a physical force, like slapping her in the forehead.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they're, evolved enough to be able to modulate infrasound to transmit messages. Well, think about it. Any type of energy wave you can modulate to transmit some type of language.
How do they produce the wave? Vocal cords?
I have no idea. No idea about how they generate that.
There'd have to be some engineering behind what kind of capacity you would need.
It could be like maybe in their lungs or something. I don't know, like a certain, it would have to be connected to like growling. I don't know.
I think it's more of a psychic ability.
Yeah, I think it probably is.
There's information attached to it. It's not just the effects of the sound.
Correct. Yeah, because it has an influence. Like it actually causes like some type of effect upon you, whether it's mental or physical. So of course, going back to Pam, she writes, the next morning I woke up completely drained and exhausted. I was unable to participate in any of the activities of that day and end up leaving the expedition early on the following day and driving home. Over the next few weeks, I was so drained and exhausted that when I would go to work, I would end up sleeping in the conference room all day. I saw my doctor, and as soon as they got my blood results, they told me to come to the hospital immediately. I learnt that half of my blood volume had mysteriously disappeared.
What?
They could never find out what caused it. I had a blood transfusion that day, and they continued every 2 weeks for months until I was able to go to one transfusion a month.
Half of her blood volume. Now, is that even possible? And by the way, is this image from that?
No, this is from another story. Look, people exsanguinate, and I think if you lose, I don't know the exact amount. I'm not so sure if it's half. I think you can lose a quarter of your blood before you start having like serious life-threatening issues.
Right, yeah.
But I'm not so sure with half. What she might be saying though is like, because she must have taken a few days, it suggests to me that maybe like the red cells broke down more rapidly or something. Like, because I'm like, she may have had the same, she's saying half blood volume, but I'm like, she may have had plasma, so she still would have had the fluid, but perhaps the red blood cells had broken down. And
some kind of technical count.
Yeah, that kind of
versus literally half of her blood being taken.
Yeah. Well, look, all of that is beside the point because the researcher, the friend of the researcher, the friend of Pam that contacted Lon about this, said, look, at the time I met Pam, she was still getting blood transfusions every month and she was still fearless and pushing for another encounter. But she was diagnosed with cancer later that year. It had already spread when she was diagnosed. She died a year later at 37 years old. And I'm still broken over her loss, especially because she was very afraid of death. It's ironic that someone who is so fearless in life was afraid to die. And it really is a horrible story. Like there's nothing to suggest that there's a direct connection between this, right? But I get where this person is going. And look, obviously cancer can spontaneously happen. It can happen to anyone, more so these days. But for 37, that's pretty young to get this cancer that had so rapidly spread, being so fast, and right after this particular kind of encounter, which had affected her blood count. So it makes me go, I don't know, maybe there is something to that. This person,
if the encounter's true, then
yeah,
more than a coincidence, you would have to say.
Yeah, you have to wonder. Now, of course, there's no way that the medical profession would ever accept that because that's just absurd. But again, because we hear so many of these types of reports, it's like, yeah, this stuff can work. Now, one of the things that this person was saying is that, look, I spoke to a friend who was a Navy pilot who worked as a contractor, obviously for some of these technological companies. And they revealed that, yeah, not only can infrasound be used to, create all these issues in people's bodies, infrasound actually induces stress that causes the body to secrete cortisol, which is produced by the adrenal gland. Cortisol plays a vital role in preparing the body for a stressful flight or fight response. During long-term production of this, it can be deadly to the human body. It can cause hypoglycemia, brain damage, weakening of the immune system, high blood pressure, weight gain, a whole range of things. And it seems like infrasound has been used to do this. And infrasound waves hug the ground, they travel for long distances without losing strength, and really are unstoppable. Not much amplitude is needed to produce the negative effects in the human body, and even mild exposure requires several hours or even days to reverse the symptoms. I personally believe that the infrasound is not the only weapon in the Sasquatch arsenal, but I do know that it's certainly one of them. I'm like, look, you might sound like a bit of a nut, but after these reports that we've seen over the years, there's a possibility. Many researchers have just, and not just researchers though, hunters, and people that aren't even searching for these things, the people that aren't trying to have encounters with these things accidentally stumble across them, are attacked by these strange waves. And normally what they describe is it induces a headache and it induces nausea. They're the two things, and it's what infrasound does. That's what the effect that it causes. In that particular circumstance, it may have caused her death, which is really horrible. So, pardon me, another warning about just how terrible these things can be. So, let's continue into some of these stories, though, of what people have encountered with these sorts of things. And I'm pleased that you mentioned what Freight Train was doing, because I was reading an old article today, actually, from Brent Swanson, and he was talking about the displays that are shown by Sasquatch. He says, look,
what do they call them?
The threat displays.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the symbols.
No, not those. There's plenty of, like the little wood stick things that they leave around.
The runes, the Sasquatch runes.
Yeah. Well, look, Brett writes that the cases of Bigfoot throwing stones, boulders, even logs, seem to be quite, they're voluminous. Like there's plenty of those sorts of reports. But also they're accompanied by menacing vocalizations, howls, grunts, those sorts of things. But it's when they throw things that are too heavy for a human to lift that you start going, hang on a second, because that's what some people say. They say, oh, it's just someone who's disgruntled in the woods that are throwing stuff at you. Well, yeah, maybe. But when someone uproots an entire tree and throws it at you, probably not a human, probably not a bear.
I got a story coming up from a guy who was doing major industrial works up in this area in Washington, and they were installing, I think it was like electrical poles or some kind of serious infrastructure. And he said this site was in the middle of the forest, and they'd come back in the morning and there'd be strange footprints. And those huge, those huge cable spools that weigh a ton.
Yeah.
Those, you need a truck to deliver them. They're just absolutely massive. This guy said that 3 or 4 of those had just been hurled into the ravine, like a discus, like something had just gone and thrown them off.
This is the thing. Even though these creatures are big and they've got a lot of mass, like I'm sure they have a lot of strength, the strength that they display is disproportionate even to their mass.
Yeah, it seems super normal.
Again, there's this, and that there may be a reason for that, because it might be, and this comes up later on as to why there's only one footprint ever shown. It's like they're showing off. They allow themselves just to be seen, so people are confused. And then what do they start doing? They start wandering more. They start looking into it more. And then more of the activity kind of takes off. So it also has this weird wild goose chase factor, which seems to pop up in some of these cases. But he writes here, there are many cases of Bigfoot bluff charges. And so basically a Bigfoot tries to pretend that it's playing chicken with you. And there's one that came from 1952 where a man saw a Bigfoot on a dirt road north of Orleans that emerged from a spot near Bear Creek and it went off into Bear Valley. The witness kept driving but later saw the same creature and stopped his car. At this moment, Bigfoot ran towards in a very menacing manner, veered off to a walk down the road, and then charged again, this time grabbing the car and refusing to let go until the man had driven a few hundred yards. So he's just driving along this Bigfoot. Yeah. 1968 also had two such reports. There was one of Mike Gordon, who was camping in his Dodge truck at a place called Grays Falls Campground. It was in March of that year. He woke up in the middle of the night to see a Bigfoot rush towards the truck, where it proceeded to pound and shake on the vehicle for 2 hours before it staked back into the trees. So I don't know what it's doing there, if it's backing itself off.
Can I just show these? These are from Barbara's car. Giant thumbprints and fingerprints on her car, her dusty car.
How weird is that?
Yeah, so whatever that was near her cabin would often leave these giant handprints on her vehicles.
See, the ridge detail on that's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah. Because you can see all the dermal ridges.
Well, not only that, can you see there, if you zoom in a little bit into into the left-hand side there, you've got these bifurcations and lakes. So the top left-hand side there, if you move over, so see there's like a lake there? There's like a hole.
Yeah.
And then directly below it, you've got the bifurcations in it. But that's pretty hard to fake usually.
Yeah, it's not very good scale, but she's got other images which show her hand next to, or her prints or her fingers next to these, and they're ginormous compared to hers.
Well, the reason why I mention that though is because, some people do things like they get gloves, and gloves have these striation patterns in them, and they'll just put their glove, in something, in some talcum powder, and then place it on something, and then say, oh, that was a Bigfoot print.
Yeah.
But because it's got striations, people go, oh, it's a fingerprint. But that doesn't look fake. It's got the actual normal features of what you'd expect in a human fingerprint, but obviously it's much larger. That's pretty fascinating.
It's freight train.
He's had enough.
He's got a big hand and he's got a big cone head.
We'll get back to that in a moment. So I want to tell you the story of Rick Fisher. So he was this tour guide, independent paranormal researcher living in Pennsylvania. But many, many years ago, back in 1972, apparently he was working in his hometown, and he claims that he was investigating reports of a Wookiee that was causing a stir in his hometown. Now, he had been called to examine a strange set of footprints, and these footprints were really large. They were in the soft mud of a drained lake bed. Mm. It was winter, and Fisher was amazed to discover that the trail led right down to the deepest part of the lake, which was still in this drained state, but it had about 7 feet of water in it. But strangely enough, whatever this thing was, this large creature, it had walked down to the lake and then seemingly walked through the water and then stomped out of the pool on the other side and continued up and over the hill.
Okay.
So why wouldn't it go around? It just went straight down through the water and straight out. Now, hearing this story, it was being told at a Bigfoot conference in Ohio. This is many, many years ago. This is written by Micah Hanks. He said that he approached him afterwards and said, I just wanted to ask you about that particular encounter. And he says, yeah. Well, look, it actually gets a lot weirder, but, I normally don't include it in the presentation because it's just a little bit over the top. He says, weeks after this incident at the drained lake, I've been driving along next to a cornfield when suddenly, there in the road just in front of me, was Chewbacca the Wookiee. He said there was this gigantic hair-covered humanoid, but it was thin, that it looked malnourished, and it was strolling down the highway directly in front of him. Fisher says, I wanted to pinch myself. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But get this, right?
So that's why they're saying Wookiee and not Bigfoot, because of it's so thin.
It's size, right? But he says, but it still has a Bigfoot style to it.
Yeah,
it just seems like it's malnourished.
I'm just thinking, why would you say Wookiee?
Yeah, exactly.
Bigfoot?
Well, he said at that very moment, just as it was dawning on me, what I was actually seeing, the thing vanished. And Mike is like, what do you mean vanished? He said, it didn't leap off the side of the road. I didn't take my eyes off it. Right there in front of me, it just vanished. It was gone. And he was actually very troubled by this. He's like, I don't know how to explain what happened. And of course, this is why I don't tell anyone anymore, especially at conferences, because people just don't know what to make of such a story.
How many times have we heard this? Where even when people are willing to step forward and share their sighting, they leave this detail out because it's too crazy. Well, it's like they've come around to talking about Bigfoot, but the fact that Bigfoot just vanishes, you can't include that.
Well, I think the reason why that prevents many people from talking about such things is because if you're not familiar with these sorts of topics and you see a Bigfoot, people will readily believe probably that there could be an undiscovered ape getting around.
The one I'm thinking of was a family from Washington that had that counter. We covered it on the show, and it was covered in the news and the local press. He did a recreation with a local TV station to show where the sighting was. It wasn't until he wrote about it years later that he added, I never told them that I actually saw it for longer and it just vanished.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because what happens then is like people will believe you that you've seen some animal. If you say it vanished, immediately it's like, well, you're hallucinating. That's why people don't tell that part of the story. And it's such a shame as well because you're totally right. Many people have this experience, but they don't talk about it. So it's not like it can help others to go, oh yeah, like I saw the same thing, but I didn't want to say it because it was just so unsettling. So, I have to highlight this though, like this image of Bigfoot really is that it's this shy, elusive creature. Maybe in some circumstances, kind of a gentle giant, a bit of an idiot. It's more afraid of us than we are of it. But, that's not really the case, right? I know that you and I kind of make jokes about him being this lovable moron. But the reality is that people have interactions that can be quite dangerous with these things that are clearly apparent here. And people assume that, oh no, if I just talk to it nicely and just interact with it, it's all going to be fine until it hits you with a wave of infrasound that destroys your blood count. So there's a researcher, interestingly, by the name of Jim Porter. I don't think it's any relation, but talks about a report that came from the 1920s. It came from a Creek Indian man who was found dead under very strange circumstances in Oklahoma. Now, apparently, this man was found with his legs drawn up, hands folded under his head, and some of the party who found him said that they got the impression that he had died not only in deep pain, but also while he was praying. Like it was in this weird position, right? So it was discovered that he had died from a severe beating with terrible blunt trauma wounds to his head and body. It seemed that he'd been praying at the point that he'd been killed as if he was asking for assistance or help as something attacked him. Now, coincidentally, around where he had been killed, there was huge footprints and handprints, as well as indications of a struggle with a very, very large thing.
Uh-oh.
There were soon spooky stories in the tribe, and at the time, a large hairy beast had frequently been seen in the area, and it was thought that this was a revered, sacred forest spirit, but apparently it wasn't. It was just a pissed off Bigfoot that had killed the man, possibly as he lay prostrate praying for its mercy. No one is exactly sure, but eerily, there would be piles of bones found in the area that included human bones. No further investigations were conducted because it was a report from the 1920s. But yet again, showing this, sorry, this tea's making me cough, this realization or this readily acceptance of, certain communities that, oh no, it's like it's a forest spirit. Like
it's a guardian.
Yeah, it's like, no, it's like it's a pissed off Bigfoot.
They're here to help us.
Yeah,
return to the trees. No.
They're not here to help us at all.
Except for Freight Train, he's misjudged.
Well,
yeah, have a drink of water. I'm dying over there.
Can't wait till we get out of the studio.
It's the Freight Train white lady karma.
It definitely is. It really. This morning I was fine. I come into the office. I sat because you weren't in the office. I've sat down in the office. Immediately I'm like coughing, sneezing. It's just like.
Yeah, and there's something weird with the electronic interference around this area as well. Like you're driving through near our office and your phone will lose connection with your car and
constantly
things will die. The battery in your phone starts to die. There's some weird EMI going on.
My laptop drained because I always have my laptop plugged into my dock. I put it in the car and I was driving and I drove through where my phone cut out. And as soon as I got home to open up my laptop, I'm like, it's drained.
Yeah, it's weird.
What the hell? We're pissed off the white lady.
I wouldn't want to work here more than 2 days a week.
Which is what I do.
To do the shows because you wouldn't want to be in a store every day just being immersed in whatever.
Probably Bigfoot infrasound.
Yeah, unseen infrasound is going on.
Just horrendous. Anyway, still in the 1920s, apparently there was also a state of reports from Alaska, right? So there was this report that apparently this whole town was abandoned and there's a lot of
This old story.
It's an old story, right? There's a lot of discussion about, how true this is and if it's been embellished over the years. But it's a town of Portlock, right? It was located in the tiny bay that's in the Kenai Peninsula in southern Alaska. And apparently dating from around the 1700s, it had been inhabited. But throughout the 1920s, there was this series of strange events that this thing kind of appeared in the town and started causing all of this trouble. And people were reporting that they were interacting or at least seeing this large, hairy, wild man that was prowling about in the forest. And apparently it would leave behind huge footprints and trees that were ripped out of the ground. Classic kind of Bigfoot behavior. Everything kind of really escalated in the 1930s when in 1931, a lumberjack by the name of Andrew Kamlak was found dead. Apparently he'd been bashed over the head with a heavy piece of logging equipment. Now, like what you were describing before, Ben, this logging equipment was far too heavy for one or even two people to carry it. It had to be hoisted, it had to be craned, and yet somehow this thing had been thrown 10 feet. So it's like, what is the power that these things seem to have? I mean, whatever this thing was, it was able to pick up a very heavy piece of machinery and throw it far beyond what any normal human being would have been able to achieve. So the stories of this hairy giant started doing the rounds, and people started finding more of these large footprints. And of course, there were these large footprints found at the scene of where this body was found. Now, the natives were calling this being a local term for it. But they said, this thing's been around. It's been around in the forest for a while. And over the years, it was reported that several other bodies were found in remote areas and trails around the town, not directly in the town, but some cases, their bodies were torn to shreds. And by the late 1940s, cannery workers who were there refused to come. They offered to pay them more. They offered to bring in security guards. Nothing. There was even a moose found with its head twisted off in a macabre sight that caused the hunters who found it to flee in fright. In the meantime, there were allegedly many more mysterious disappearances as well, and by 1949, the residents had enough and abandoned the town.
Yeah, the ripping off of heads seems to be a pastime favorite.
That's a lot.
Freight Train and others.
Is it really?
Yeah, Barbara has cases of her chickens just winding up with no heads and finding raccoons beheaded around their property, ripping heads off things.
There was another book which I looked at today. I ended up refunding it because I was like, the problem was that there were just no sources in the book whatsoever. But I think it was like When Bigfoot's Attack or something like that. And it was a little bit like...
That's not the book you just referenced.
No, it's a different one. So, it was another one. Let me see if I've got it here in my orders. Look, it doesn't really matter, but my point was that particular book, basically every case was like, it twisted someone's head off. It was it's like every Bigfoot attack was, here it is. Bigfoot, Deadly Encounters.
Who's the author?
This is Ethan Blackwood.
Yeah, so Ethan Blackwood, and there's another one called Ranger Blade or something.
Is it AI?
No, but they just release a Bigfoot book every week.
Right, yeah.
Full of all these fresh encounters they've just heard.
Because I was like, oh my God, look at all these fresh encounters. I was like, wait a second. They're coming up like...
Bullshit.
Look, I try, there's plenty of stories that I'll tell on the show where I can't find the source, but they've hung around, they've been around long enough that normally you can find kind of a pattern of where they've come from. This particular book was like, there wasn't I couldn't find any reliable source of that in it. So I was like, no, I'm just not going to go with that.
Yeah, it's just fiction.
But look, another hotspot for this type of activity, of course, is Mount St. Helens. And there's a lot of stories out there. There's a really wild story that when Mount St. Helens erupted, if you recall, Ben, that the military went in to rescue a bunch of Bigfoot that were burned. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, it was Bigfoot Rescue.
Bigfoot Rescue, that kind of stuff. Well before that eruption, back in 1950.
And then there was like black helicopters and big black vans that came and took them away.
And hoisting them out. And yeah. So it'd take, again, be very careful with stories like that. But you've got May of 1950, 32-year-old Jim Carter. He was on Mount St. Helens. He was going skiing. But guess where he was skiing? He was skiing in the vicinity of Ape Canyon. Now, Ape Canyon, of course, is that classic story of the group of miners that I think was it Jim Beck or something?
But they basically got attacked and cornered.
Yeah, in the 1930s, they got attacked by a bunch of Bigfoot. I was digging into that actually today, just because we know the story so well, but I found a little follow-up to that. In that book, When Bigfoot Attacks, it actually details the story in far greater detail than what I've ever gone into. But there was more of this element to it which I hadn't considered before, where it was saying that they'd gone to this particular location. They were mining, doing what they were. They were attacked by Bigfoots that night. They were inside their cabin, and the cabin was besieged by Bigfoot-type creatures. If you recall, they were in a log-style cabin that had no windows in it, so they couldn't look outside, and so they didn't want to go out the door. But these Bigfoot things like throwing rocks on the roof and stamping on the roof, having a Bigfoot temper tantrum. And one of the classics is there was like chinking between which is like a material to put the logs together. A Bigfoot managed to knock that out and stick his arm through and tried to grab an axe.
Yeah, I'm just looking up IMDb to see if there's a movie about it because it is the perfect like thriller.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Overnight thriller siege attack movie. Years later,
I think I'll just find the guy's name. Actually,
is there anything Ape Canyon? There is 2019. Oh, there's one from this year, Siege of Ape Canyon. Just came out. There's one from 2019. What's this one? Siege of Ape Canyon. In 1924, a group of gold prospectors led by Fred Beck claimed they were attacked by a massive, hairy, ape-like creature in a remote Washington Canyon event that became one of the most infamous Bigfoot encounters in history. So it looks like this is a documentary. We should check that out, actually.
Yeah, we should. You know, there's a follow-up to it as well. So Fred Beck, I don't know who he was speaking to, but he did get in contact with, I don't know which leading researcher. I think it may have been either Brad Steiger. It must have been Brad Steiger. He was very elderly, but he told this story, right? He was like, well, much like the other guy who had the encounter that Micah spoke to, he's like, yeah, like we were attacked by these Bigfoot. The story's been kind of sensationalized a little bit over the years because they weren't really throwing boulders. They were throwing things at the side of the cabin and they were jumping on the roof. And yeah, we were firing shots at them, but they seemed to be impervious to bullets. That was, but he's like, but they were also manifesting in the physical. He's like, what do you mean? And he's like, they weren't entirely physical. Like they were physical, but they were manifesting in our reality.
Interesting.
And he kind of said he felt like he was somehow kind of on the right level to be able to perceive them. He said so he got really spiritual about this stuff, right? And he even includes, and let me just see if I can bring it up here, right? Whereas it was right at the end of this article because he was being harassed by reporters and all that kind of stuff. Like it really, they wanted to keep it quiet, but it really was horrible. And even when Beck went back to the cabin, apparently it had been ransacked, which is kind of typical for Bigfoot encounters. But he said they were able to find large prints, but no sign of blood or any bodies that should have been at the bottom of Ape Canyon. That's the other thing that came out of that story, actually, was that morning, right? So when daylight came through, apparently all of the sound, the cacophony of sound all died down and the forest returned to silence. But apparently they called them the Mountain Devils. And they said the Mountain Devils were gone, but they went out to survey the area, and Beck claimed that he could see one of the beasts standing on a ledge of the canyon at about 80 yards away. He aimed his rifle and shot it, sending it hurtling 400 feet down to the rocks below. So it actually, he killed this thing, right?
I can't remember all the details.
It was gone when they went back. It was gone. And he was saying later on, as he started telling more details about this, he's like these curious elements. So it says here, Beck would add curious elements, such as that he had been led to a mine. This is why they were mining in that area. They'd been led there by a spiritual being described as a large Indian dressed in buckskin. And he said he believed that the Bigfoot creatures they had encountered were actually psychic and had a close association with the spiritual realm. He believed these creatures were interdimensional in nature and had observed the group for some time before manifesting in the physical form. He would point out the fact that they would sometimes just find a single footprint in a sandbar where none others around them existed, and there was never any other physical trace of evidence that they were there, but they were leaving proof that they could phase in and out of this reality. He says, there is no doubt in my mind that these beings were present and observing us, but they had not yet appeared in physical form. I do think the mountain areas are extra sensitive to spiritual vibration, usually of a higher order, but sometimes lower. We ourselves, being extra sensitive to spiritual vibration, which is maybe handy if you're a miner, I suppose, perhaps had come into contact with the manifestation of these beings easier than perhaps the average person would have.
From what I'm seeing online, the trailer to the Siege of Ape Canyon documentary came out less than 24 hours ago. Do you want to watch it?
Yeah, let's play it. Cool.
These small town the small town monsters.
Oh, great. They did great stuff.
Yeah, they just posted it. So let's watch it. It's about 2 minutes. Let's take a listen.
The Ape Canyon story is really one of the classics of Bigfoot.
This isn't just a Bigfoot story. This is the Bigfoot story.
What happened is that there was this core group headed by this guy, Marion Smith. His son, Leroy Perry Smith, his son-in-law, Fred Beck, a family friend named John Peterson, August Johansson, and another friend, Mac Rhodes. They established a claim for a gold mine in 1922. It's called the Vanderwhite Mine.
It's cool they got all the old photos.
Yeah, very cool.
It's in 2025.
Working up there year-round is not impossible, but you're not going to get anything done. Let's build a cabin. It was 10 by 20. Build this cabin.
Oh, that's the
strictly by
cabin.
hand, maybe with block and tackle. It was a formidable cabin.
The truth.
It got towards evening, and when they went to bed in the cabin that night after it got dark,
There's this large impact on the cabin. They all look out through the hole, and they can see 6 or 7 in the moonlight, 6 or 7 of these large creatures dancing around the cabin, and all hell breaks loose.
The creatures are throwing rocks, they're climbing on top of the roof, they're trying to get in, they're trying to dig underneath the cabin, they're beating at the door.
that one of the creatures reached through the chinking and grabbed the axe and was pulling it out. In the morning, when it got light, it had stopped, and they had decided that that's it, we're out of here.
There's large rocks scattered everywhere. There's footprints, large human-like footprints, 13, 14, 15 inches long everywhere.
I think the imagery is what draws people to the story.
There was no evidence of it, really. It was just a story.
Did this actually happen? Were these guys real? What if there's some sort of evidence left behind of the cabin or the mine?
Yeah, well, that really is the big question. Did any of it happen at all? So I like that they're trying to address the fundamentals. Is this anything more than a story?
Well, like I said, I think it was a leading researcher. I think it was Brad Steiger. I have to double check it, but they did speak apparently to Fred Beck, and this is where Fred Beck told the details, and that's mentioned in that When Monsters Attack book. So I'll have to pull it out and double check that.
Yeah, cool. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
They're saying it starts streaming on November the 11th. So I'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that these sorts of stories, like it's not just a one-off. That's the other thing. There are multitudes of stories that are similar to this, probably not as extreme and as violent and as vicious as that particular attack was. And then certainly not with the spiritual kind of element added to it as well. But plenty of people have had really horrifying interactions with Bigfoot-type creatures. And, it's like, well, are they resulting in people's deaths? Now, this is something that comes up quite often in Missing 411. It's like, well, David Politis has never said, well, there's a direct connection. There was that overlay, I think, of the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, over Missing 411 hotspots. And there seemed to be maybe a bit of a correlation between Bigfoot sightings and disappearances.
He's got to be the number one suspect.
Well, the thing is, so there's a couple of examples. So this is the story of Jim Carter. He came to Mount St. Helens to go skiing in the vicinity of Ape Canyon. He was with a group of 20 other people. The weather was clear and calm. The skiing conditions were perfect. And he was an accomplished skier, right? You can see the Missing 411 kind of elements coming in here.
Is this a report from Politis?
No. This is just a report that's known in Bigfoot lore. But this one was, who published this one? This was by Brent, actually. Brent Swanson published this one. But he apparently, as I said, was this very good skier. And nothing seemed to possibly go wrong that day. And as the group went to a landmark known as Dog's Head, it has an altitude of around 8,000 feet, they decided to take a breather. And Carter apparently said he was going to keep skiing on ahead and come around and take a photograph of them. Now, he was acting normally. There was nothing strange about this at all. But then things took this very bizarre turn, because apparently after skiing off and around to the left of the timberline, he suddenly broke out in this mad, desperate dash on his skis down the mountain. This was according to the witnesses. They said he was taking chances that no skier of his caliber would take unless something was terribly wrong or he was being pursued. Apparently, he was going like the devil.
But if they could see him, why couldn't they see what was pursuing him?
Well, that's a good question, right? He jumped over 2 or 3 large crevasses and continued careening to the right into a steep canyon wall, much to the bafflement of the other skiers. They said he would go to the ledge, and they went down to see him at the bottom, but he was nowhere to be seen. They scoured the bottom of the canyon to find no trace of the missing skier except for a box of film, and a large-scale search was launched. Things would only get stranger from there. According to some of the searchers, the whole time that they were out there, strange things happened. Some of the searchers claimed that they heard odd noises that they could not explain, or saw large dark shapes looming through the trees. There also seemed to have been at least one searcher who had claimed that he had been overwhelmed by a horrific stench at one point.
Uh-oh.
One of the searchers was a professional mountaineer by the name of Bob Lee. He called the entire search incredibly eerie and would come to the conclusion that Carter had been kidnapped or perhaps even killed by the legendary Sasquatch. So I'm like, okay, that's one possibility. No one else saw it. So it's just this one researcher's idea or, searcher's idea that it was a Sasquatch. But there are plenty more stories of this. Apparently 75 people searched the area for 5 days straight for the missing man, but there was no sign of him or his equipment. Nothing was ever found. Lee would tell the Washington Times, the Longview Washington Times, that the area had Bigfoot attacks in the past. So he claims that he's lived in this area for many, many years, most of his life. He said there have been 25 different reports of people getting attacked by ape-like men in the area over a 20-year period. One of the group was of the Boy Scouts, and he said that that they've heard these reports as well. And several of the boys in the past have been taken off the mountain because they were hysterical after getting attacked by mountain devils. So it's like there's plenty of reports out there. So there is one here by David Paulides in the Missing 411 series of books. And this related to a bear expert and experienced hunter by the name of Bart Schellyer. Now, he was this respected outdoorsman. He was an animal expert. He'd worked in the fish and game industry for a long time. Like, he knew exactly what he was doing. He'd worked on the Grizzly Bear Recovery Project in Yellowstone National Park in the 1980s. This was putting telemetry collars on bears. Like, he was a very accomplished outdoorsman. So surely nothing would happen to him. Apparently, he'd worked on projects to save endangered Siberian tigers. He was a master survivalist. Except in September of 2004, he arrived by float plane to an isolated lake in the Reed Lakes area. Now, this apparently is in the southern area of the Yukon Territory. He'd gone for a bow hunting excursion. The plane's pilot dropped him off in that cold expanse, and he was alone, but given his experience, no one really thought anything of it at the time. He'd made countless trips like this, and his routine was that he had enough stuff to last him 2 weeks, and he was obviously going to come back and meet the pilot. Now, when he didn't return, a search was conducted, and they found his camp. Now, when they found his camp, they had a half-eaten meal set out, and the rest of the food was all there, but there was no sign of him himself. His bow was there, his inflatable boat and his gear was gone, and the pilot just assumed that perhaps he was out hunting, although it was a bit odd that he'd left his backpack, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio behind. The pilot waited, but he never came back. Of course, they came across this, sadly, when they searched for him, they came across his hunting pants unceremoniously laying on the ground, oddly turned inside out, as if they'd been peeled off and discarded. Soon after, they located a baseball cap, a camera, and a balaclava, and a camouflage mask that he'd been wearing, all strung along as if he'd just been walking along and tossing them aside as he went. The searchers then came across the morbid sight of a part of a skull and a few small bones, but the rest of the body was nowhere to be found. Now, they did actually, I think they confirmed that skull was his, but they were never able to determine how he had died.
Was it cold enough for hypothermia? What time of year was it?
It was cold, but he was an accomplished outdoorsman, and there was no reason why he would have gotten himself into this situation. The theory is here, without it being said directly, is that because of the way that he was so violently attacked, and what does Bigfoot do in all these reports, rips people's heads off, is that's what happened. This guy, unfortunately, was attacked by a Sasquatch. And
peels you like a banana before he rips your head off.
Pretty much. So then you have in the 1980s, this is 1987 on June the 1st. It's the story of 16-year-old Teresa Ann Beer. And she had gone on a camping trip in a remote area of the Sierra Mountains, approximately 25 miles northeast of Bass Lake. Her companion was a 43-year-old Russell Welch. Now, this story is a little bit odd and it might cross more into true crime rather than a Bigfoot story, but it does have this strange edge to it. So apparently Russell Welch was this avid Bigfoot enthusiast, and he was like setting out intent on having a Bigfoot encounter, right? So for whatever reason, this Teresa Ann Beer wanted to go with him. So they did. They went out and they camped, and it's a little bit odd that her parents would allow her to go, but it doesn't really matter, right? They went off on their adventure and everything seemed to be fine. But Welch returned to Fresno several days later without Beer in tow. And when the girl made no effort to contact her family, he was considered a person of interest in the possible disappearance because it's like they were in a remote location. What the hell's going on? So he was questioned by authorities about what happened to her. And this is where things got really strange. Welsh at first told police that she had run away from him in the wilderness and didn't know what happened to her. Okay, that immediately sets off red flags. But later on, he would change his story and decided to tell them what really happened. He claimed that during their camping trip that they'd gone out on a hike to look for the elusive Sasquatch when at some point Beer had become separated from him in the thick forest. At that point, Welsh claimed that one of the massive creatures had swooped in to grab her and carry her off into the wilderness. It may come as no surprise whatsoever that police found all of this pretty hard to swallow, and even though the suspect himself seemed to truly believe what he was saying, they believed that they possibly had a kidnapping or a murder on their hands. So they conducted a comprehensive search of this area, and it turned up nothing. No trace whatsoever. No graves dug, no disturbances, no blood. It's all incredibly strange. Now, Sasquatch or not, it doesn't matter. He was charged with child stealing. A trial was set, now waiting to go to court on these serious charges. He was actually offered like a plea deal, allowing the prosecutors to say, well, look, if you do 1 year, we'll offer you to do 1 year. As long as if we find a body, we'll charge you with murder. But if we don't find a body, we'll leave it at that. And he disagreed. He's like, nope, no, she was taken by a Sasquatch. You're not going to get me on that. And it was overturned. Like he got off. They weren't able to link him to anything.
He looks innocent.
Yeah, that doesn't look so comforting, does it, by any means? But as for the victim herself, there's never been any sign of what became of her. And oddly, Welch has always maintained that she really was in fact kidnapped by a Sasquatch. It's like, okay, look, I don't know, because I mean, the point is made with that though, is that if the guy murdered her, there's a whole range of other stories that you could come up with and quite likely get away in the wilderness. You know, like if you could say, well, if he just stuck with she ran off, it's like you don't know what happened, and they'll never find. There's never anything that they can charge you with. But for him to be like, oh no, I'll tell you the real story. She was taken by a Bigfoot. Like unless the guy's psychotic, which it doesn't seem to indicate that there's any of that going on. That's a pretty bold claim.
It's only going to harm you in the eyes of investigators.
Exactly.
To tell such a story. So yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah,
unless something really happened.
It's really strange. So then you've got like these characters amongst the Bigfoot research community, and there's a researcher by the name of Tin Kuhnbo Baker. Now, he told this story when he was being interviewed on a radio program many years ago about a first-person account that he was given by someone who claimed that they had witnessed a Bigfoot actually killing someone. Apparently, 2 men, a hunter and a guide, were in rural Arizona or New Mexico. He can't remember exactly which, but it was back in the 80s. And during their hunting excursion, they sighted a Bigfoot creature. Evidently, the hunter decided to get famous and took a shot at the creature. However, instead of killing it, all it did was piss it off, and the creature attacked the man, knocking the hunter's head off with a single swipe of his hand. Okay, we've got this, modus operandi of the Bigfoot continuing.
And it took his pants off and ripped his head off.
Well, that's the missing 4-on-1 element, which is strange. Like, why did he take all of his clothes off? That's like, you wouldn't take your clothes off when you're fleeing a Bigfoot. So that previous story is a little bit, strange. Then there's a story that comes from Canada of a couple of friends who were camping or trapping in the sticks. And during their trip, they had returned to their campsite on a couple of consecutive days, to find that their campsite had been gone through. Someone had been rummaging through their belongings, opening containers that required hands and fingers to open, and found that their food had been eaten. Both men got spooked as it was getting dark and decided to end their trip early. One started packing up the camp while the other went to get in their vehicle. When he returned 30 minutes or so later, he found his friend dead and headless. The victim had finished packing up and was sitting on a log facing the fire when some kind of creature set upon him, killing him before he could react. The surviving friend seemingly missed the melee by mere minutes. He jumped in his vehicle and left the area and the camping gear where it sat. So I'm like, okay. Again, they're going for the head, these things. They're quite horrible kind of creatures,
You haven't even
they?
Gotten to the key piece of imagery that you prepped for this segment this hot blonde in the forest.
I always end up doing this because I wanted to lead to like
facing a horny, green, bug-eyed, green-eyed Bigfoot.
Where I wanted to go with this stuff is I realize we're running a bit long now, but where I wanted to go was that many of these stories, as much as they seem to be quite absurd and outlandish, in the field of Bigfoot hunting, they really escalate. And it goes from it being just simply a flesh and blood creature that seems to have a slightly higher intelligence, not as high as a human being, but enough, to something that seems to be supernatural or something that even might be alien or extraterrestrial. So there was this case that was mentioned by the UFO Files group. This is by Johan Harrison. He published it. So I think he created the AI image for this, but it relates to a report from the spring of 1988 with a Margareta Nilsson. So this comes from Western Sweden in late summer of 1968. And apparently Nilsson told a UFO researcher that she had a very terrifying experience when she was in her 20s in the late 1960s. Now, apparently she was so terrified by this at the time, but felt like she should share it later on. And this story actually bore similarities to what some other younger girls had experienced 3 or 4 years earlier in the exact same wilderness location. These areas were only about 30 kilometers apart, forested kind of areas. But Nilsson did not remember the exact time of the year of the incident because so much time had passed. But she said it was late summer or early autumn when the forest berries were ripening. And she remembers exactly what happened, almost every detail as if it were a movie playing over in her head. So on this particular day, Nilsson and 3 other female friends were going out into the forest, into this vast wilderness mountainous area, and they were picking berries. And the group had these young girls. They were all in their early 20s. They set off for the morning, and when they set off looking for these berries, there was this fog that laid upon the ground. Now, it was a bit spooky, and they were a little bit uncomfortable because apparently one of the girls had been told that the night before, mysterious lights had been seen hanging above the forest where they were going. Now, whether this was true or not, they didn't know, but it did get the girls kind of on edge as to, what are they encountering, especially with all the fog around. Now, when the young women reached the forest of the mountains, this fog began to lift a little, and so did their spirits, but it left this mist. There was kind of this mist over this area that they were wandering through, and they wandered, and it's like a Swedish forest, it's like moss-covered rocks and pines and firs, and it's a very magical atmosphere. It's like almost an enchanted forest.
I think this is the Swedish forest in your imagination.
No, this is what's happening, right? But she said it was still this dark, deep forest, which immediately started her kind of thinking about more, terrifying and scary kind of things. So she said it's kind of childish to be thinking about things as supernatural beings. But she says as they approached the heath of the area, where they were expecting to find a lot of berries, they'd found berries there in previous years, they apparently were focusing on something that was in the distance, and they couldn't quite see what was going on because the fog was still laying around. But Nilsson got this strange feeling of being watched, which is always how these sorts of reports start. She kind of was sensing that there was something a little bit off. And she noticed a movement in the corner of her eye, and she slowly turned around, and that's where she saw it. She said what she saw was something that was bear-like, but not a bear, in black fur. The beast's hind legs resembled those of a bear, while its arms were long, furry, and slender with clawed hands. The creature seemed to have no neck. Its head seemed to be attached directly to its shoulders. Its eyes were large, slightly slanted, and shone from within in this strange greenish-yellow glow. The head had some similarities to a frog, but nothing more really. The ears and the mouth that couldn't be detected, and she was terrified and shocked to see that she couldn't move. She realized that she couldn't move. She was grabbed by a witness. No, I'm sorry. The creature grabbed her and, basically bundled her up in its furry arms. And she said she could feel evil and hostility emanating from the creature. She tried to scream but could not. She also smelled an odor that had a similar smell to a wet dog. Her heart was beating fast, and the only thing she could think about was trying to escape. In her last moment, she suddenly kicked the creature in the chest. But she said when she kicked it with the boot sank into what felt like a doughy substance. It wasn't hard. Yeah, it was this
doughy
substance.
So he's not entirely physical, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, it's got this like non-physical, physical attribute to it. She tore herself free from its grasp, and she apparently grabbed hold of her jacket and tore it to shreds with its sharp claws. She said she got deep scratches on her skin. The creature then disappeared into the mist, and she fell backwards into the berry bush. She quickly got on her feet and ran away. Now, she left the basket of berries behind, and she ran up a slope to a gravel road as fast as she could be carried. Her friends thought that she'd been wrestling with a bear. It was a kind of a joke. And then they realized, oh no, she really had been injured by something. They heard a dull rumble coming from above them. And the next image, Ben, is what they saw. The 4 looked up in surprise and saw a large object visible through the fog at low altitude. It had a dark lower body that seemed to be made of metal and was shaped like a giant stingray. On the top, 2 green spheres were also visible. As the object flew over them, they saw a light ramp on the underside of the abdomen and several blue pulsating lights. It then flew into the fog and disappeared. Nilsson fully was convinced that the creature that had attacked her was the craft's pilot. They waited for a moment for the worst of the shock to wear off, Then she returned to the place where she'd encountered the creature to retrieve her basket of berries. I wouldn't have, just my advice, but that's fine. I guess she figured it's flown away now, so that's fine. Isn't it weird though how like she described it as having these yellow-green eyes, and then the craft has got the same.
Well, that's just AI. It's like he's.
Yeah, but this is what she's saying. She said that it had on the top were 2 green spheres.
Okay.
So it's a bit weird.
I was a bit critical of the AI because in the previous image, I tried to make him more like Freight Train, but instead of a big hairy penis, it just gave him a burrito.
We're not in the plus section. They're going to get demonetized for this.
I don't know. I don't know what the AI was thinking, but that's what we got. We got a burrito.
So later on, she went to the local health clinic to be treated for the deep lacerations on her arms. The doctor didn't think that it was caused by a bear, but when she told him of her experience, the doctor actually took her very seriously. Since he was bound by confidentiality, he wouldn't report it. The young woman's boyfriend also contacted a local newspaper, but they weren't interested in writing about the story. But here's this element that also came out. So when she went, so you can see here in that image, right? She's got these very dark blue rubber boots on that she had, these what do you call them, like Wellingtons, and that's what she kicked the creature in the chest with, right? She said that when she later on the following day picked up the boot, she said that the dark blue rubber boot was now pale grey in colour, and there were lots of small superficial scratches all over the surface.
Oh, bizarre.
It's like the colour had been drained from the boot.
Yeah, it's not a flesh and blood creature. It's something else.
And it's not entirely a Bigfoot either, but it does have this Bigfoot kind of feel to it, but then it's connected with a craft, not the burrito penis. It's all very strange. So I think with a lot of these reports, right, I mean, you got to be careful with them. And I might go into more of these on Tuesday because there's a whole collection of reports of people shooting these things and they're being completely impervious to bullets. Like bullets literally pinging off them, bouncing off them, just ticking them off, as I reported one of those cases before. But there does seem to be this supernatural nature to these things. And much like most of the phenomenon, it's interested in us. Like as much as we're interested in it, it also is interested in us. But look, I go back to the start of this show. It's like, don't go seeking this stuff out. Don't.
Unless your name's Barbara Shoup.
Right, well, that's the only circumstance where
and
you can.
You need to seek out the freight train. Find out what makes him tick. What are his motivations? Why does he have a 25-liter capacity bladder?
Camel Bigfoot.
These are the big questions we're going to find out in the Plus extension, The Unseen Audience from Barbara Shoup, coming up after the break. If you want to get access, head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today, get access to the big extensions we do on these shows every single Friday. And of course, Plus members get access to the exclusive shows we do every single Tuesday as well. If you're feeling game, sign up for the MU Max tier because that'll give you access to our massive back catalog going back 18, 19 years worth of content. Big stuff coming up in our Plus extension, of course. We're going to continue what just happened to be a random Bigfoot special, not planned.
Yeah, great.
But
Worked out nicely.
I've got habituation. It eventually goes into Kawani Lapsarita style, a high strangeness. Some really incredible stuff coming up in Plus. I can't wait to tell you the story. Again, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today, help support your favorite show. That's a wrap for this free edition of MU. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.